Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Hizzy Hustle. My name is Tyler, licensed realtor here in the Okanagan, coming at you with a little bit of a take on just the the change of the mindset of people coming out of the election and into the spring summer market that's supposed to be heating up here in the Okanagan. From what I've seen, there's a particular not misconception, maybe misguidance, maybe a little bit of uh, some agents trying to please people to get the price right. But there's this thing going on between the $600,000 and $800,000 range, which is the new affordable first time, single family dwelling range here in the Okanagan. Where people are just completely out to lunch with their offers or with their asking prices. You got your typical BC box that's got 4 bedrooms, 2,000 maybe 2,100 square feet, going for like $800,000, and then you have your newer builds in a more desirable area, more of a suburban area, going for 820 to 840. Like, it just doesn't make sense that there's that little of a gap, and I think a lot of people are just completely out to lunch with how the market's behaving, right? You need to really get out there. You need to show sellers that they are not correct in their expectations of where buyers are going to be, and listing agents also need to be a little bit more aware of where they're getting their comparables from, right? Like, I can just pull up 4 bedrooms and pick the ones that are selling and get a broad idea of where the market value is. But if you don't really take into consideration that it's a 1970s house versus the 2000 house, and you're not taking into consideration that not only does the furnace need to get replaced and the hot water tank needs to be replaced and the AC is a little bit old and the yard needs to be completely ripped apart and resodded and all this type of stuff, right? You have to repaint the whole house, you have to renovate the whole house. But market value says that a 4 bedroom house is around 800,000. They're not taking that into consideration, right? So every single time you have these buyers walking through the house being like, this is a $700,000 house, this is a $650,000 house. They're just throwing a band-aid on it, and because particular areas, like, oh, you're in a more desirable area of Vernon, like for example, if you're on Middleton, those houses typically go for like $50,000 more than the ones on East Hill because of the type of homes, when they were built, all that type of stuff, right? There's a lot of things that come into consideration. So they think that because they're in a desirable area that they get to charge that premium, which is absolutely not true. So the buyers that I've been going out with recently, qualified buyers are worth something in this market. The guys that don't have subject to sales, the ones that are ready to go and need a place to live, I think those buyers are worth more than sellers are willing to admit. And I think it's totally fair to be giving those offers that might feel like a little bit of a low blow, not a disrespectful one, and that's on the buyer's agent to really guide the purchasing power, but I think, or the purchasing process, but I firmly believe that buyers are in their right to start trying to wake sellers up. And I think the more we do it now, the better it's going to be for the summer market, because these guys need to realize that just because the election's over and the spring market might potentially pick up coming into summer, that doesn't mean that you're going to get more money than you made or that was available in COVID, right? We're not, I don't think that we're at that point. We're still overpriced. It's my firm opinion. I think we're overpriced, and the only people are buying are the ones that really find what they're looking for at a price that they're willing to pay. Sorry, one sec. Sorry. Anyways, so yeah, that's a little bit of my take on that. I got a video here for us that we're gonna watch. It's just on a little bit of I guess market insight on how the looney's been performing and that type of thing. So let's take a look.
Let's talk a little bit more about what the economic numbers are telling us and get some outlook perspective for the currency. Carla.
And the other thing I want to take into consideration, just to mention, right? Like we had prior to this whole, God, I don't even know what you want to call it. This 6 month process, 8 month process that we've been going, where we essentially haven't been represented by, or in the House of Commons. Our dollar was up closer to 75, right? And then you just see this crazy downfall. And then coming into April, things are looking good. Election happens, dollar's back down. So, yeah,
Carlos
things aren't
Capistrán
good.
is a LATAM and Canada economist with Bank of America Securities. Hey, thanks very much for joining us, Carlos. Appreciate the time.
Hey, thank you very much. Happy to be here.
We've been talking a little bit about this latest inflation reading in Canada, and it is interesting because on the one hand,
The other thing too is stop looking at mortgage or the interest rates. Stop letting interest rates dictate what you're doing, because everyone keeps on looking at the Bank of Canada for their interest rates, but nobody's taking variables. So I never really understood that one. People's psychology is interesting. It's You really have to know how to read people, and you really have to know how to expect how people are going to act in these situations, right?
you did see easing in inflation, which might argue towards a weaker Canadian dollar versus the U.S. currency. But I think people still see some signs of inflation under the hood, like what they're paying at the grocery store. And the market seems to be anticipating that maybe the Bank of Canada is going to be a bit cautious in the short term with, for example, cutting interest rates even further. Well, what's your take?
Yeah, correct. So the good news on inflation were mostly based on gasoline prices that are so low.
Yeah, how crazy is that? I remember gas prices getting close to $2 a liter, and now for the first time since, oh my gosh, close to high school for me, that we're down to $1.38. When was the last time I would have thought to see $1.38? That had to have been like, yeah, just post high school, kind of like as the carbon tax was first implemented, kind of thing.
Now, for different reasons, and that's why headline inflation printed below 3% and even below 2%. So it was a very good print on the headline front. The problem is when you look, as you said, under the hood, when you look at core measures of inflation, it was a bad surprise. I mean, core inflation is now clearly above 3%, and it's also clearly trending up. So the Bank of Canada is just not going to like both things, that is now above 3%.
So essentially what he's just saying is that the Liberals getting rid of the carbon tax makes it look like inflation is not as bad as it is, but it's actually bad. It's above 3% and it's getting worse.
And that it's trending up. Why? It's unclear, right? I mean, the economy is weak, you have lower gasoline prices, but the truth is it was across services and across goods, a little bit more services than goods, but it was across the board. So now we have this core inflation trending up.
The other thing that people need to realize too is that economic growth tends to happen in these particular situations, and the problem that they're not willing to admit, and that nobody wants to look at either, is that the economic growth that happens tends to happen in the highest percentile of the rich. It happens in the top 2%, right? So the economy for those people are doing really, really well. But the middle class is still struggling. People are spending less money. They're going on less holidays. They're house poor. They need to spend their money on things that matter, and therefore it's going to slow the economy. It doesn't matter what you think is happening when you look at it as a broad average, right? The negative ends up balancing out the positive. So you have to look at it in a snapshot of the area that actually is affected by it. And I'm telling you, it's not as good as people think. And it's just going to keep getting worse if we continue down the path that we're on, right? It's crazy.
So I don't think the Bank of Canada is nowhere near cutting rates. For sure, in the meeting in 2 weeks, I think it's going to be very difficult for them to overlook this. And in that sense, we believe that the
I'm calling it that they're going to hold.
market needs to price out Bank of Canada rate cuts, again, at least for the upcoming meeting, but maybe even a little bit further in the year.
Well, we did see some of that among some of the traders in reaction to that data this morning. But I guess the other side of this, Carlos, as you well know, we're coming off a Canadian jobs report, which wasn't really something to smile about. And we even spoke with a guest earlier who talked about how dependent our housing market is on a robust labor market. So what's the Bank of Canada to do if the inflation story isn't exactly what it would like it to be at a time when you're seeing some deterioration in the jobs market?
Well, the Bank of Canada needs to wait a little bit more. You're right. I mean, the economy is weak. We are expecting.
You can dislike it if you want, but in my generation, typically, a lot of the people that went and did trades right out of high school and worked out of town and did the oil field thing or any of that ended up being a situation that was able to capitalize on a market that didn't inflate yet, right? Typically, kind of into that 2012 to 2016 era. That 2016 was I bought my first townhouse. I was 22 years old. It really changed a lot of things in my life. And yeah, so it allowed me to get into the market because I had an income. I didn't have schooling. I didn't have school debt. I had a employment history and all that type of stuff, right? And then my wife, for example, when we got together, she was 1 year out of schooling for being a pharmacist, and that's a lot of school. It's a lot of debt. It's a fantastic job, but without the backing that I had provided, she wouldn't have been able to get a house. She could afford one, but the banks wouldn't have let her. So there's so many different issues when it comes to the housing market and how people get into it and the struggles that come with it and the demand, the supply, the costs of the transfer, right? Like property transfer tax. I'll say this time and time again, property transfer tax needs to go away. It is insane. It's one of the most garbage money grabs that people can actually come up with. It does nothing good for anybody, and the problem is that the government just wastes the money anyways. It's not like any of that money's going well, and I don't know why I have to pay $12,000 to $15,000 each time I want to move my house. What you're doing is essentially taking away my motivation to move, which in the house I'm in right now, these are the houses that are most desirable for your first time single family dwelling home buyer. I'm not kidding you. It's completely ruining any process of people moving because now I have to stay here long enough to realize that $15,000 profit that I'm going to have to pay in the future in order to move houses. That's another cost of real estate. So people don't have lump sums of money like this. People, when it comes to real estate, need to have the transactions, for the most part, wrapped up in payments, in the mortgage, right? The down payments are way too big now. The costs are way too big now. Deposits are getting bigger. It's the amount of liquid capital that you need in order to make real estate purchases is getting out of reach of people. On average, it's like, if you're moving into your second home, the first time home buyers, they get away with it because of the first time home buyers grant. But the next time you move over, you have to come up with a deposit, a property transfer tax, lawyer fees, all that type of stuff. It ends up being roughly, we tell people to gauge between 3 to 5% of the purchase price, right? So now on top of coming up with all the money extra that you would have to pay for the new house and the profit that comes with it, you now have to also come up with $30,000 of closing costs. That's insane. That's insane.
expecting a contraction in the second quarter. You saw a GDP contraction in the second quarter. We are expecting GDP for the year to be 1% with downside risks. So for sure, if you just look at the economy, you look at the labor market, the Bank of Canada has room to cut. And indeed, we do have the Bank of Canada cutting all the way to 2% at the end of this year. So we do have that. But the problem is core inflation is going the other direction. So most likely what is going to happen is the weak economy is going to get the upper hand on core inflation. And soon enough, maybe in a couple of months, we're going to see core inflation going down again. But hopefully. I think at this point, a necessary condition for the Bank of Canada is to see core inflation below 3%. And hopefully with that, a couple of prints that shows that core inflation is at least not trending up anymore. And that would open the door for the Bank of Canada to be able to cut rates. And again, we do see room for them to cut below neutral and probably all the way to 2% to help the economy. Of course, this is only going to help the economy for next year or for the end of this year, not now. But the only mandate for the Bank of Canada is to look at inflation, and they really look at core inflation, and that is not looking good at the moment.
Now, the Bank of Canada also fields questions during their media availability about what's happening with the Canadian dollar, whether they want to answer those questions directly or not. For those who are curious, based on everything you're saying, how you think about the currency, which at our lows of the year got briefly below 69 cents. So the fact that we're closer to 52 cents highlights that we have seen some strengthening against the greenback off the lows. But you go back to the last fall, we were talking about a currency that was a lot closer to 75 cents. What's your outlook for the Canadian dollar from here?
So first of all, we have a weak U.S. dollar, and that dominates our outlook, right? I mean, there are many reasons.
So that's the other thing to take into consideration, that little bump there. It's maybe not because of the election, maybe not because the Liberals were winning.
For that, but we have overall and for the rest of the year a weak U.S. dollar. Now, in this context, we do see some specifics of the Canadian economy that should help the Canadian dollar, especially against the U.S. dollar. So when we look at that, for instance, our Canadian strategies are looking at 138 for the end of the year, and then 135.
Same time, we had that spike up because the U.S. dollar was doing well, or terribly. So we're actually still at this mark. The U.S. dollar is just doing worse. Therefore, comparatively, we're a little bit higher. Our economy is in the dumpsters
for next year. So we are certainly looking at a stronger Canadian dollar.
And this is the point that I was making when the qualified buyers, the ones that are ready to go, the ones that don't have the subject to sale, the ones that have the money and are willing to put in the offers and say, I'm ready 2 weeks from now, let's remove conditions, I want this house in a month and a half. Those guys are worth, I think they would be worth almost 10% off asking price, to put it in easy terms.
Here, part of the reasons in the very short term, as I mentioned, do
you want to wait or do you want to sell now?
Believe that the market needs to price out Bank of Canada rate cuts. Later on, we believe that growth is going to help the economy. A little bit of that is going to be the big fiscal package that we're going to see in Canada, and also the eventual cuts by the Bank of Canada. And finally, the other thing that may help is, in the tariffs game, in the trade wars, when you look at it in a relative perspective, both Canada and Mexico through USMCA, through the trade agreement, are relative winners. In absolute terms, they are losers, of course, because they are so exposed to trade with the US. But in relative terms, if you look at the effective tariff that Canada is facing versus the US, it's still the lowest tariff out there, and that should also help the Canadian dollar.
Carlos, unfortunately, we only have about a minute left, but we haven't really had a chance with the inflation numbers in Canada today to highlight that the idea of a, quote, staycation, because of the tariff worries and people saying, okay, I'm not going to go to the U.S. or what.
Well, we don't really need to stay in on this one. But, yeah, you essentially see what they're talking about, right? If we keep on looking south of the border, we're going to never feel like we're going to be stepping onto solid ground. I've been following a lot of what's happening down in the U.S., just politically, news-wise. I keep pretty up to date with a lot of world news, and what a gong show down there is at the moment. I would say that's a huge portion of not just Canada, but a lot of the world's economic woes at the moment is all just. I really don't know what's going on. There's a game plan. We'll find out about it eventually, but if you try to predict or understand the paths that Trump's taking, you won't get to a logical, like a logical result. It just doesn't make sense. I can't figure out what the frick he's doing. It's not good. All I know is I'm sure there are a lot of people making a lot of money off of that stock market at the moment. So I'm sure there will be somebody looking into that at one point. But yeah, that's my take for today. Hopefully, I'm not going to say not wrong. I hope things get better. I really hope our economy takes a turn. I hope the U.S. comes to their senses a little bit, but there's no telling what's going to happen with that one. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Hopefully Carney figures some stuff out. We got 5 more weeks before this middle class income tax, whatever tax cut comes from the Liberals, and in the meantime, we'll just see what Mark Carney's up to, and find some new videos to watch. So thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, hit that notification bell, tune into the next one, and yeah, thanks for watching.